Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to Formed, episode 10.
Woo!
Episode 10.
We made it to 10, and we made it through Holy Week.
We did.
We're back after Holy Week.
Nice.
I had questions. I'm like, will Barry and Sissy both be here Tuesday morning after Holy Week?
After Holy
Close.
Week. Oh, my goodness.
It was debatable.
Hey, but I got to say, we survived Lent. I'm back on coffee, so properly caffeinated. I mean, we've done 6 of these
That's right.
episodes during Lent, so this podcast is about to get so much better. Like,
Well, one of them you weren't
I was
drinking
gonna say,
coffee.
only
exactly.
5 without coffee.
Right.
Okay, so you said last week that you still get an Easter basket. We all want to know, what did the Easter Bunny bring you?
That's right.
All
What
right,
was in your basket?
So it was some candy, and the Easter Bunny likes to put a little folded up bill in a Easter egg. So that's kind
Yeah,
of
that
nice.
is
Yeah.
nice.
So I did end up switching out my candy with one of my children's because the Easter Bunny doesn't always do a great job of remembering what candy I like and what I don't. I mean, it's only been 50 years, but
Still working on that?
yeah, I was like, so yeah, Will got my Reese's Pieces. I may have just started another controversy here because
You don't
I
like Reese's
do not
Pieces?
like Reese's Pieces. I love Reese's, do not like Reese's Pieces.
Really?
Wait, so you like the cups, but you
not
don't
the-
like
Oh yeah,
the
these
pieces.
are completely different experiences.
But Reese's Pieces is like a little bite-sized goodness. No?
No,
Carolina agrees
No.
with you.
No, I
Yeah,
like them.
she gave a thumbs
Thank
up.
you, Caroline.
Okay, well, Sissy, did you arguably the most debated topic from last week?
Controversy.
Yes, controversy. I saw it on the news. You love Peeps.
I still like Peeps. I had Peeps. Isaac bought me Peeps.
I did. I got some
did.
hot tamale Peeps.
Yeah. Well, no, and you got the original
And the
ones, which
original,
are my
yeah.
favorite. Yeah.
I told Sissy before, so Sissy did our announcements on Sunday, and I told her, I was like, during your prayer, I'm just going to leave a peep on the little stand up there.
Thank God he did not.
And honestly, it was my plan until I mentioned it to you, and
I was
you
like,
said,
"Don't do
don't
that."
do it. I'll laugh the entire time.
This is not.
And so,
I will point out that said Peeps purchased by Isaac were put into our staff lounge where the entire staff of Irving Bible Church is capable of taking anything that's left in the staff lounge that's laid out on the counter to be enjoyed and consumed. And they sat there all week.
They
except
were
for the
busy
ones
during
that
Holy
Sissy
Week.
ate.
Yeah,
No,
they were
no,
busy.
no.
They didn't realize
This was
now
an
it's too late.
indication that the rest of the staff has
Well,
much better Easter candy taste.
You
than
made me
Sissy.
question my taste because when Isaac bought it for me, I had one and I was like, this is still good.
you're
I
like,
still really like
no,
this.
you're like, this sucks, but I'm not going to.
No, I can't go back. I've got to say it's good.
Gotta dig
Did you
my-
know Peeps come
heels
from
in.
Peter and the rooster? And that's not true. Don't fact check that, anybody listening. Okay, so let's talk about why church. This week, across the world, really, there's so many people who visit church for the first time on Easter, or a couple times a year. It's like, hey, I'm going to go with family on Easter, enjoy an Easter service, but after Easter, like, why church? Like, why do we, even post-COVID, if there's ever been a time for people to kind of like, I'm good, like,
Yeah.
because it's almost like, we tell this Easter story and it's the gospel story and Jesus, and like, let me tell you about this Jesus, but there's almost this, but let me tell you about church too, of like why you should be involved in church. So let's just do that of like, if somebody comes up to you this week and says, hey, so why should I be involved in a church? Why church?
So if you're interested in following Jesus, if you're just curious about following Jesus, church is a vital rhythm. And it's one of the 5 rhythms that we talk about here. And if we want to be formed in the way of Jesus, it can't happen in isolation. Like, I can't do that on my own. I need other people to do that. And community is one of the primary ways that God uses to shape us, to form us, to conform us to the image of Jesus. And so often I think we live in such an individualistic culture, and certainly post-pandemic we're seeing And this has always been true, but even more so now because of the pandemic, of how many people are living in isolation. And so you can't do life like that. But more than that, I think it's, if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to become more like Jesus, you actually need to do that with other people who, as you do life together, pursuing Jesus together, pointing one another to Jesus. That's the only way that's really possible. That's not the one of the primary ways that's possible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the first word that came to my mind in seeing this question was Jesus, and of course, Jesus is not limited to or contained in the church. Available outside the church, experienced outside, and yet we are the Jesus people, right? We, our church, we talk about being formed in the way of Jesus, and that, I really do believe that the deepest solutions to the deepest human problems are found in apprenticeship to Jesus. That's not to say that the only solutions but the deepest solutions to the deepest human problems are found in following an apprenticeship to Jesus. And that's sort of the negative way of saying it. The positive way of saying it would be the life that you most deeply desire, right? The life you've always wanted, a life of joy and meaning and purpose is found in the way of Jesus. And the church is learning together how to live the way of Jesus through our gatherings for worship, through our experiences of community, through our discipleship and service to the world. And so join us as we together are learning what it means to follow Jesus. I think that's what I would say.
Let's say when COVID pandemic happened, I feel like that brought a bigger light even into like the podcast world and just all the content you can consume. And I'm sure a lot of people listen to this, you listen to other podcasts, and it's like, all right, well, I can hear about Jesus. I can listen to anybody preach around the country for the most part. I can listen to these podcasts. I can be formed. What do you say to that person that's like, man, I feel like I can get all the stuff. I can worship. I can get all the content. I can grow spiritually. But I don't. Do I have to be there? Do I have to tune in on Sunday mornings?
Why do I need to go to church?
Like why? I mean,
Yeah.
It might be the same answer what you just said.
So we certainly find ourselves in a time where there is more great content easily accessible than perhaps ever before. And yet the experience of following Jesus, the experience of church is so much more than just great content. It really is, and really always has been about a communal, embodied experience. You go all the way back to the Old Testament. You look at the way in which God set things up for the people of Israel to be formed, and for them it was through remembering the mighty deeds of God, the deliverance, the redemptive work of God in the world. And they did that in community and with their bodies. The great festivals, the feasts of the Old Testament were something that they did together and something that they did in a very embodied way. It wasn't just about downloading content. It wasn't just about what they needed to know. And you fast forward then into the church of the New Testament and then on to the church throughout history. And it has always been about our formation through communal and embodied type experience. And I think what happened in some ways during the pandemic was there was, I think, some of us who like so longed for the communal embodied part to be sort of restored, and others that perhaps got so accustomed to that not being a part of their experience that did focus more on the content side of things. I remember, I'll never forget this woman coming to me. She had been out of church for a long time, just months on end, where she was kind of watching online and thought, it's good enough. And her first Sunday back, and she came up to me at the end of the service, just tears running down her face. And she just said, I just forgot how important it is to be here together. She said, when we started singing the first song, I just started to cry and I couldn't stop the whole time because she had honestly just forgotten how important it is for us to be together and to do this together that is so much more than merely consuming content.
Yeah, I think we often think of church as we go to church when I think we're called to be the church, and so it's this idea of this. There is this value and significance to this communal, embodied experience, and oftentimes we think about it as being consumers, or you said consuming content, and we all listen to podcasts, and certainly helpful, and yet, if being the church is more than being a consumer, it's being a contributor. And we contribute by our participation in the Sunday gathering, by participating in worship, by singing and praying and listening to the message, reflecting on the truth of God's word for our lives, but then also participating in that smaller group. And so in the New Testament, there are, I think, 59 one another's, 59 ways we are to love one another, serve one another, forgive one another. And while that embodied communal experience that we participate in every Sunday morning is so important, church is more than that. Because the one another's can't actually happen with 1,000 people in rows for an hour and 20 minutes. It happens in these smaller groups, so our small groups or mid-sized community groups. So participating in just that sort of deep relationships with one another, and then participating by serving, by using the ways God has gifted us and wired us to serve both within the church and then outside the walls of the church. And I think none of that happens when we're just consuming content over podcasts or online services and things like that.
How's church changed for you guys from a young age till now? How's your view of church changed?
So I grew up in an immigrant church. I grew up in an Indian church. When my parents first came to the United States, they found other Indian believers, and they started a parish of their church back in India. And so for them, it really was this deep-knit community. It was a family, and literally a lot of my cousins and uncles and aunts went to my church. But then there were others that became like family to us. So I grew up in this way where I had this really deep understanding and experience of church as a closely knit community where they really did practice the one another's, where they loved each other so well. I mean, when someone was hurting, when someone was grieving, when someone was in trouble, they were the first at your home and they were the last to leave. They were there with meals. They prayed for each other, and certainly it was messy. So I don't want to paint this picture of it's idyllic, because it wasn't. It was very messy, and yet there was something really beautiful about that. And then I think as I grew older, particularly in my teenage years and as a young adult, I didn't really value that as much. Maybe it's just taking something for granted that you've always had. But living between both Eastern and Western culture and being more ingrained in the Western culture, which is much more individualistic, I just kind of lost the appreciation for that. And it's probably only in the last, I would say, 10 years that I've begun to see, I need relationships like this, not just to do life, but if I'm going to be formed to be like Jesus, I need other people to walk alongside me, to show me the places where the things that I don't see, my blind spots, where I need to grow, to encourage me as I am trying to pursue Jesus, and that I can encourage as well. I think the other thing for me, particularly why I'm at Irving Bible Church, is so I grew up in this ethnic church, which I think there's a place for ethnic churches. But I think God's heart is for the multi-ethnic church. And so being here, I think I have a greater, again, value, and I'm seeing the significance of this is not just a thing that we do because it's trendy. It's a thing that we do because it's at the heart of the gospel.
That's good. Yeah. I think back on my experience growing up in the church, and in some sense, the sort of formal aspects of church a lot of times felt for me like something to be endured. I loved like going and being with my friends and seeing people, but then you sing these weird songs that are not anything like the songs that fill the rest of my life, and you sit and listen to somebody talk for half an hour. And so it was kind of something to be endured. And yet I can even look back now and appreciate the formation that was happening in me. I think about the fact that there are still some of those weird songs from when I was a kid that are like deep inside of me, right? Because we sang them over and over and over.
Tell us the weird songs.
Well, I mean, I just think about the song "Abide with Me" that I used as part of my Good Friday sermon. And that was one of those that just seemed odd to me as a kid. But I come back and read these lyrics, and there's just something really, really powerful here. And so in a lot of ways, my Good Friday message was kind of built around some of the words from that song, "Help of the helpless, abide with me."
People today are saying, yeah, the John Mark McMillan "Sloppy Wet Kiss."
Yeah.
That's like their version
weird
of it
song.
this year. Anyway, keep going.
Unforeseen kiss.
Yeah.
We can debate
Yeah.
debate that one on another episode, right? So yeah, but now I find myself, and really, I my experience at Irving Bible goes all the way back to when I was finishing up college a long, long time ago. But it was coming here and experiencing this place that this was like something I longed to experience. That there was something about the dynamic worship that moved me, that I wanted to be a part of. There was something about this approach to teaching the scriptures that, wow, there's depth here, there's richness here, there's application to my life here. And so that's what, now that I'm in a position of leadership here, trying to make sure that we're shaping experiences that are rooted in the past and that have connection to the church's rich history and heritage, but also sort of really accessible to people today in ways that draw them in to something that is beautiful and something that is meaningful and something that has depth and substance to it, that's accessible and also deep. That's, I think, what we really want to try to do here. And then one other aspect of it, I think, from just a theological development that's been really significant for me, I think probably in the past I would have thought of, what is the church all about? Well, the church is about worship, community, discipleship, and mission, right? And kind of those four things side by side. And it was a number of years ago that I actually had my paradigm kind of shifted to recognize, yes, the church is about worship, but our worship is actually missional worship. It is worship of the God of mission that is intended to form us and send us out to participate in the mission of God in the world. So yes, worship, but missional worship. Yes, community, but the point of community isn't just for each other, isn't just sort of that kind of navel-gazing spirituality, but it's actually missional community to participate in the mission of God together, to serve the world around us together, missional community. And that discipleship is not just about learning about the Bible and learning spiritual rhythms, spiritual disciplines, but is ultimately missional discipleship, that we are engaged in this process of formation for the sake of participating in God's redemptive mission of the world, blessing others, loving our neighbors, serving our community. And so rather than seeing mission as sort of a fourth, it's like these four things that the church does, and it's actually at the core of everything that the church does. And so we're always trying to think through, what does that look like? What does that mean for us as a church to make sure that, yeah, our worship is, in an important sense, missional worship. Our community is missional community. Our discipleship is missional discipleship.
That's good. Yeah, I've got a little Dr. Jones there going on the church. Can I share one real quick? I'll share one from, so I grew up small town Kentucky, and I'm trying to say this without getting in trouble on the pod, but I've just like church associated with one political party.
Yeah.
And I feel like even over the past, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, it's just that has become such a big topic in the evangelical world. And, for me, it's just from such a young age up until I moved away in college, and even over these past 10 years, it's like, oh, okay. I mean, this sounds like ludicrous, but it's like, there are people in a different political party that are still, it's just, that was ingrained in me at such a young age of like, hey, if you're a Christian, you vote this way, you're in this party, separate those two lanes. And now, I've just learned so much about that.
And a big part of, I think, what we're, trying to navigate at IBC, and it's challenging, is our imaginations are so shaped by this political polarity of sort of left and right? And what we're not trying to be about is some muddled middle, right? That's a blend of the two, a little bit like this and a little bit like that, or right, that can actually wind up merely being compromise. we're actually trying to advocate a different way altogether, the way of Jesus, which may have some connection to or sympathy with, but also in important senses very distinct from, and offers a kind of critique of both the way of left and right. And because the way of Jesus is something different, but our imaginations are so shaped by this kind of polarity. And I think part of what happens is we can have a stronger sense of identification with our political convictions and our political tribes than to our spiritual convictions and our spiritual tribe. And when that happens, it's that you sort of filter everything through that partisan kind of filter. And so we're trying to do something here that stands distinct from that, and yet it winds up stepping on toes all the way around. Right?
Yeah, the church is supposed to be this alternative society, the city on a hill or a light to the world. And so it is this completely different way. And I think we're not used to that.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes difficult to look through that lens.
Let's go back to the beginning in Acts. The church starts now in 2023. What are similarities of the church then and now?
Acts 2:42 says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And so that's a lot of what we even talk about in our small groups here, the model that we use. I think those are still vital parts of how we are to be the church, that we devote ourselves to Scripture, to studying Scripture, and reflecting upon how does this apply to my life? What is God inviting me into? We devote ourselves to fellowship, to having deep relationships with one another. We just talked a bit about how community is so important. And a lot of times that happens over a meal. Like we all know that when we share a meal together, there is something that happens where you have just sustained conversation and space to do that together that garners more intimacy. And then prayer. And prayer is part of our corporate gathering, but prayer is also a way that we love and care for each other as we understand what's going on in each other's lives and are really praying for one another. But then in the early church, we also see that they practice generosity and compassion. So you see that through Acts 2 and 4 and 6, that those were such important ways of how they lived among themselves, but also for the sake of their cities. And so they shared their possessions. They gave to those in need. And those are still things that we want to practice, that we are called, as Barry talked about earlier, it's formation unto mission, that we are called to serve using the gifts that God has given us and using the resources that God has given us. It's why we partner with local organizations here in Irving. It's why we go into our schools, because we believe that as the church, this is part of who God has made us. And so I think there are still some really significant ways of what happened back then that we're striving to be today.
Yeah, it's good. So my mind went to Acts 2, but then also to what for us as a church is one of our core stories, and that is Acts chapter 11, the birth of the church at Antioch, because we are more and more at IBC these days becoming a more fully multi-ethnic church. Just recognizing that this is something that is near to the heart of God throughout the pages of the Bible, this kind of multi-ethnic vision, people from every tribe, nation, people, language. But then also we find ourselves right here in one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the country. And so this is an essential part of our calling, an essential part of our vision. And I think about the church at Antioch in Acts chapter 11. The Jesus movement began with almost exclusively Jewish people. And there was this strong sense of identification between one's ethnicity and one's religion that was just taken for granted in the ancient world. And throughout the first 10 chapters of the book of Acts, you get a few instances where you have Gentiles, those ethnic other. The word actually that's translated Gentile is the Greek word ethne. It's the word from which we get our word ethnicity. So the ethnic other, that you do get some individuals who are Gentiles who hear the gospel and come to faith in Christ. But it is Acts chapter 11 where you actually have some unnamed followers of Jesus who are scattered by the persecution that breaks out after the death of Stephen, and they come to Antioch. and they Luke draws attention to the fact that the gospel has gone to Jewish people, but now they begin taking it to the Greeks. They begin to cross ethnic boundaries in a city where you had 17 different ethnic groups in that city, but they all lived in their own ethnic ghettos, that there was this real strong sense of sort of segregation in this incredibly diverse city. And it's here that you actually have the beginning of multi-ethnic church. And we're told that the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. And the reason for that is they didn't know what else to call them, right? That they couldn't refer to them by a particular ethnic title. So they had to come up with something else. They called them the Christ people, because this was something that the world had never seen before, a community of people gathered together, crossing deeply entrenched ethnic boundaries to be together because of what they found holding them together in Jesus. And so that's something that we are more and more aspiring to live into here at Irving Bible Church. So I think that's an important connection back to it's a core story for us.
So how's the church changed, for better or for worse, over the years? Let's just do the past 20 years.
I think the biggest thing that I think of is the use of technology. So technology is great, very helpful, very advantageous, and yet I think it's caused us to be more isolated than ever before. So the fact that we can listen to podcasts or online church is great. There's certainly place for that. We hear every week about some of our community that they're sick or they just can't leave home, they're traveling, and so they still get to be connected to us through online services. And yet for many of us, and I've been tempted by it as well, where Sunday morning, sometimes I just want to sit on my couch. I want to drink coffee in my pajamas and watch church. And so that's really tempting because it's so easily available to us. And yet that's not what it means to be the church. It's this embodied communal experience. And I think if that's all we're doing, then it's much more of a consumer mentality than how am I participating? How am I being the church? How am I contributing rather than just consuming? So to me, that's probably the biggest difference from 20 years ago, because just that wasn't available. If you were going to go to church, you had to actually get up, leave your house, and go somewhere to do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things I think of.
My mind went to the things we've already touched on in some ways, but consumerism and tribalism, right? So consumerism, just that recognition that, we even talk about when we're looking for a new church, we use the language of church shopping.
Right.
And that oftentimes is driven by just my preferences. And when we get that sense of connection to church that's driven purely or primarily by preference, my preference, then when something isn't the way that I prefer it, right? That's something that there's a tendency to I'll drop that one, go find another one. And especially for what we're trying to do in this diverse community, there are times where I have to set my preferences aside for the sake of the person sitting down the road from me, and vice versa. That we have to be willing to engage in ways that set our preferences aside, and yet we find ourselves in a consumer-oriented culture where what's in it for me, and that sense of my personal preferences are such a kind of high, everything that the ways we're shaped, formed in our cultural environment are reinforcing that tendency. And that's something that we're always trying to sort of wrestle with in terms of the way that we think about church. So consumerism, and then we've already touched on, again, tribalism, and that can play itself out in a variety of different ways, whether, as you were referring to earlier, politically, the way in which we have a tendency to be segregated by race and ethnicity. And as we've already alluded, there are meaningful, valid reasons why that has been and may continue to be the case. And yet, the reality that Dr. King observed over half a century ago, that the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour in American public life, that it's still the case over half a century later. And so that tendency that we have to sort of divide ourselves in ways that I would refer to as a kind of tribalism, seems to me.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about consumerism, one of the things that we go after here is that when you come here, we do want to stretch you. It's not the best church growth strategy, because a better, if you really wanted people to show up, is to say, well, let's do church the way this group of people likes.
Make it as
right?
comfortable as possible for you.
And that's not what we're trying to do here, because we actually don't think that that's what the Lord would want us to do. And so there are going to be moments where each of us, or where our preferences don't win out, where each of us will feel a little bit of discomfort, and yet you're invited into that for the sake of the other.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, because you alluded to it, see, I mentioned it, but that we don't, while we are really passionate about becoming a more fully multi-ethnic church, we don't suggest that those churches that are not that are somehow wrong or bad. I think there are very meaningful reasons why. It may be that the church is in a community that just doesn't have that kind of diversity around them. It may be that a church is comprised of an immigrant community for whom culture, but also even linguistic differences sort of make it necessary for them to be together in a church. And then there is what one writer referred to as, even with the history of the Black church, a necessary place of refuge, a community that has experienced oppression, marginalization, persecution, that gathers together to draw strength from that. And those things still, those dynamics still are at play. And so very meaningful reasons why a church might not be multi-ethnic, be diverse, that isn't that kind of negative aspect of what I called tribalism a moment ago. But I think that what we're saying is there's just a desire for us to overcome the tendency to focus on personal preferences in order to create something that is beautifully diverse, that's not easy, but is beautiful.
Yeah. And I think the diversity that we talk about is not just ethnic either. I mean, one of the beautiful things of what I really love about our church is the diversity in generation. So it's very intergenerational in socioeconomic background. There's so many ways that we're different, where there are things that I like.
Preferences.
What's that?
Food preferences.
Easter candy preferences.
Easter candy preferences
French
that are
fry
completely
preferences.
valid. Yeah, but that's I mean, so all of that is what goes into who we are.
Yeah. And what's interesting is people that write about growing a church,
Right.
their tendency is to say, figure out the thing that everybody has in common, like focus very, very narrowly on commonality.
Right.
Because people want to be with people who are like them.
Yeah.
And so the strategy for church growth has been everything about that, that sense of commonality, that very narrow, what's the word I'm looking
Homogeneous,
for? The homogeneous unit principle, right?
Yeah.
Just that idea of focusing on commonality. And we're actually trying to create something that is, again, not easy. It's not easy to be a multi-ethnic, multi-generational church, to have the kind of differences, the kind of diversity that we're trying to embody. But we think it's beautiful, it's meaningful, it's Christ-like. Yeah,
I'll add two positives of how the church has changed for me is the creativity within the church. I think I even watched something yesterday of a big production a church put on for Easter. And it's probably a little too much for me as far as the lengths that they went.
Yeah.
But I came out of it saying, all right, I appreciate the thought that went into it. Like, there were lives that it made them understand. There were people who maybe understood the gospel a different way because of that creativity in this production of a kind of a play but music at the same time and all of that stuff. So I think creativity in the church has, the parables have taken on a new form, and all that. And also I think touch points of churches within the week with their people, I think, has changed over the years of now because of technology, we can stay connected throughout the week. It's not just I'm just going to see you or hear or think about my church on Sunday morning for an hour. It is social media and e-letters and all the stuff that we have more touch points now. And I think that's really cool. Okay, last question. If somebody's listening to this and they, went to Easter, they're coming out of Easter and they're like, all right, I know I want to get involved in a church. What does that mean? What counts? What is, it's like, is it serving? Is it going on a Sunday morning? All right, well, if I go twice a month and I just attend church twice a month, am I involved in a church? Is it a small group? Is it get involved in a ministry? What does it mean to be involved in a church or to be connected with a church?
So I think it's showing up, but then it's more than showing up, it's participating. And so the initial step would be come be part of our Sunday gatherings and participate. Even if it's different for you, try to participate in worship by singing and prayer and reflecting upon that message. What is the Lord inviting you into? I think such a vital step of being part of the church, though, is community. And so what are those ways that you can find to connect with others? Because the more deeply you can connect with others, the more you become part of that church. And so whether that's here, it's our small groups or our mid-sized community groups, how can you begin to form those relationships? Because like we said, one of the primary ways that God uses to form us is through our relationships with each other. So I think for me, those would be the two quick hits.
Yeah, we have this little formula, and it kind
Yeah.
of is what just you were describing. We talk about come as you are, get connected, be transformed, and live your purpose. Come as you are is show up, is be here, is come gather in that sometimes kind of feels like a bit of an anonymous large room for worship, but be here, show up. Make that a priority. Come as you are, get connected. The opportunity to go a little deeper, to step out of the kind of anonymity of the large space and into a smaller space where I can get connected to other IBCers. Be transformed. This is actually engaging intentionally in the process of discipleship, spiritual formation. We have formation small groups that are for that purpose, and then ultimately live your purpose. That is, how has God wired you, designed you, gifted you to make an impact on the lives of others, and to really look for that opportunity for helping serve others, helping demonstrate the love of God in Christ, helping meet needs. So participating in God's redemptive purposes in the world, recognizing that God has a part specifically for you to play in that regard. So come as you are, get connected, be transformed, live your purpose.
Awesome. Well, hopefully, if you've ever asked the question, why church? Or if you have someone in your life that is saying, man, well, I don't even, do I even have to get involved in a church? Hopefully, this episode helped with that. And if you're in DFW, we'd love to have you here at Irving Bible Church. But even if that, just find a church, get connected, get involved, get in community. That's what it's about.
That's good.
All right, let's talk about some gift cards. I got such a random topic I sent you, but I know. For some reason, I was thinking about gift cards the other day, and I'm like, all right, are you in or out on gift cards for Christmas or holiday or birthday gifts? Because I know somebody in my life, they're like, no gift cards. I want it to be an actual gift, or they don't give gift cards because it's they don't feel like it's meaningful. I'm going to buy you something that is meaningful because I don't want to get you just a gift card. How do you view gift cards?
I like gift cards. Yeah.
Yeah, I love receiving gift cards. I get the idea of
Yeah.
I think this is the way my wife is. She'd rather me try to come up with something that's meaningful for her rather than just sort of the somewhat easy way out of a gift card.
Yeah.
And yet I often find that the gift card is actually a better way because
Right.
I don't always hit a home run when it comes to trying to be thoughtful and creative, and yet I know I can get her something that she's going to like with the gift card. What I thought about when I saw the random topic of gift cards, what made Isaac think of gift cards? But
It's Easter.
But I thought about the
Yeah.
fact that my kids growing up, when they would get gift cards, it would be a little of annoyance to me because I knew that gift card's going to cost me money, right? Because
Ooh.
they got a $20 gift card to Target, but what they want is going to be $29.99.
Exactly.
And so I'm going to
You're
have
shelling
to
out,
pay
yeah.
for somebody else's gift card that they got for one of my kids. So yeah.
It's actually kind of smart.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, do you have the worst gift card you've ever received? Do you have one of these?
I couldn't come up with anything. That's what made me think of. I couldn't come up with a bad gift card experience. I remember one time getting a gift card to some place that was just nowhere near where I lived, and so it was well, okay, I'll enjoy that, but I don't know when I'll be able to drive across town to actually be able to. I was actually groceries, but the groceries were like a long way from home. So yeah.
That's the thing about gift cards with some of them. It's like, I remember getting one from like my grandma when I'd come home from college for like gas. And I'm like, all right, well, yes, I need it. I like this. But man, I wish it was something else.
Something a little more fun than
Something more
gas
fun.
in the
Practical.
tank.
So like you love McAllister's.
Oh my.
And-
Oh boy. Oh boy.
What would you
you're
do
gonna,
with
you're
Mc-
gonna make me you're gonna make me throw a restaurant on the bus? I don't know that we need to do that.
Okay, never mind. Sissy, do you have a worse gift card?
I don't know if I have a worse one, but one of my less preferred one would be places like that I don't want to go eat. Yeah. That-
Applebee's.
I'm also not going to throw any restaurants under the bus.
We could have some
But that would
church members.
probably be mine. I've gotten a couple of those where I'm
Yeah.
like, not really going to use this.
Okay, let's do top 3 favorite gift cards right now. If you got them, you're like, these are the ones that I would want. Amazon's at
You
near the
never-
top.
you can never go
Amazon
wrong
is-
with Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon.
I did see a
top
list.
3.
I did see a list yesterday of
Did you?
like, hey, the top most popular gift cards. Amazon was obviously number 1.
Amazon's one of my top 3. I think the other one for me would be if you have to know me fairly well to know where I go, but like massage, pedicure, like that's always a good one for me.
Okay.
And then if it's a restaurant I really like, I got one to Perry's
Oh,
recently. That's pretty nice. So
that's a nice.
that was a
restaurant.
good one. Yeah.
Perry's pork chops.
Oh,
They're incredible.
I don't get the pork chop, but the pork chop is pretty good.
You know, for me, you can never go wrong with some kind of a book. So half price books, I love. Audible, I think I mentioned I do a lot of audio books, and so those
Your
are
screen
good
time
options.
report
So-
was audible.
It was actually Kindle. I couldn't come up with
You
it at the
researched
moment,
it,
but
yeah.
I read a lot on my phone. I was like trying to figure out why did I spend that much time on my phone. I like spent all day Friday reading, and it was on my phone. So
Okay,
there you go.
that's a screen.
What are yours?
Nike.
Well, of course.
Yes.
Nike. But a lot of times it's that where like somebody give me a gift card. I'm like, all right, well now I can combine it with some money I can spend and get this
Something,
pair of shoes
yeah.
or something like that. Nike, Barnes and Noble, and Amazon.
Nice.
I will be at the last Barnes and Noble whenever.
really?
It makes me so sad whenever I see like the number of stores closing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like that whole dilemma of, all right, I get stuff off Amazon, but I also never want Barnes and Noble to
Don't
ever
want
shut
the actual
down
bookstore
in my
to go
entire
away.
life.
Yeah.
I also used to get really hyped up about iTunes gift cards back in the day to
Yeah.
like get a album or something, and now we just all stream.
Yep.
But I feel like gift cards are such a scam because I wonder what the percentage of them like that just never go
Oh yeah.
used.
Oh, I have.
Yeah.
Must
I
be-
have like a.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
Or you find old gift cards and you're like, and then you
They're
spend like
expired.
30 minutes
Right.
calling the number and seeing if there's
Find out if you can
some.
still use it.
Yeah, and there's like $1.28 on it. All right, there's gift card talk that you all wanted. I know you're all wondering about gift cards over Easter weekend, and you got exactly that today. So thank you. We'll be back next week for another episode of